I have to say, though, that it's mighty impressive how well you handled the sharing of the music and the video. That requires a certain technical proficiency with this platform. So well done. And I know that we're all learning how to meet in this way online, given the situation with the coronavirus and all the changes that are happening in our society as a result. I want to also express my, it's a kind of, interesting, I'm hearing the word deep longing. Yes, for the new pattern of society and relating to one another that is becoming more and more visible each day, and we're doing it here. I know there are many challenges that people are facing right now, so I also want to recognize that it's not always easy, transformation and awakening collectively. I have been noticing, however, that there's been quite an acceleration in terms of the felt sense that things are really changing. So, John, we met maybe 6 weeks ago, and you reached out to me after reading something that I had written, a message from the coronavirus. So I'll start there with a little bit of a story. And again, I want to encourage anyone to ask questions in the chat, or really to consider this actually a conversation, because I feel that there is collective wisdom in this virtual room that will emerge through all of us. And it would be boring to only hear me talk. So I do hope you'll chime in whenever you feel inspired. So yes, I was in India in March, and the journey to India was interesting. I was in the USA at the beginning of March, and I was scheduled to co-lead a 2-week Mystic Express adventure in Delhi and Rishikesh. And already there were intimations of coronavirus going global. And my intuition said, go to India anyway. The intuition was interesting, was saying to me, the way that I tune in, which I'll say more about later, it was saying, yes, the journey, the Mystic Express, is probably going to be canceled. In fact, it will probably be canceled the Thursday before. And yes, go to India, just cause. Like, I'm not going to tell you why, just do it. It will be good. Trust me. So I've learned over the years to trust that inner voice and that felt sense of resonance. And so I boarded that Ukraine International Airlines flight to Delhi via Kiev, which I'd never done before. That was already really interesting. And showed up, and there were some extra long lines getting into Indira Gandhi International Airport because of the measures that were being taken. India, it turns out, was quite proactive in its response to the virus. I was grateful for that. And I went to the hotel, and it was a nice place near a lake in a comfortable neighborhood in Delhi. So I was there about a week in advance in order to adjust to the time zone and settle into the energy field there. It's a powerful place. Many of you may know, when you go to India, you're practically teleporting to another planet. So I was there, and then I was inspired to write. And in particular, I was curious. People were saying a lot of not very nice things about the coronavirus. There's a lot of fear, and understandable fear, but nevertheless, I had a sense that it's not polite to talk about people or viruses behind their backs. And I knew it was possible to have a conversation with really anything, any form of life, any intelligence, subtle or physical. So after getting a lot of sleep and feeling really adjusted at that point, I tuned into the coronavirus, and I had a sense, all right, you have gifts. So I asked first for its gifts, and I received 6 of those. And then I asked if there was a message for humanity, and I indeed heard one. Let me just put a link into the chat. Not that you necessarily want to go off and read this message from the coronavirus now, but at least you'll have it if you haven't already seen it. So I connected, which meant really stilling stilling the mind and feeling love. So it's like there's an emptiness in the mind and a fullness in the heart. And then I feel a kind of like a little jab behind my right ear, right above my right ear, which is interesting. I hadn't quite placed it until this moment. But there's a sense of almost like a voice that's pressing in on my awareness here. And it isn't exactly audio, but it's kind of this synesthesia of multiple sensory stimuli. So, all right, there's a sense that, yes, the coronavirus is there. It has something to say. So what I received, I'll just share the gifts. How about that? Because I don't want to take too much time on just the very introduction to our time together today. So the gifts of the virus, number one, first and foremost, slowing down humanity's frenetic activities. Number two, activating networks of cooperation. And I could already see people were gathering to support one another. Three, spreading helpful DNA, which is interesting, that the virus in some way is propagating changes to our genetic code. And that is one of the things that viruses do. I knew this, but I wouldn't have just added it unless I could feel the tapping on my ear. Number four is upgrading humanity's immune system. Five, creating the conditions for peace and well-being. Six, saving lives, especially over the long term by strengthening the web of life. So what this said to me is the coronavirus is actually here to be helpful. And it's easy to say that if you've lost a loved one. I realize it's going to be harder to accept that. So I hold the whole here. But on balance, I was feeling, all right, so this is sort of like a divine intervention that is creating a global meditation retreat. And I really appreciated the opportunity. I knew that India might be a place where there could be a real difficult time. 1.3 billion people living in close quarters. But I wasn't giving in to the fear. I was staying with this sense of love, actually, coming from the virus. It said, no, I'll share this as well. Love will go this far and farther to bring healing to the mind of a young species that is still in the process of remembering itself as a divine incarnation. So it's also a spiritual teacher, the coronavirus. It's the works. It's a powerful, powerful divine intervention. So I slept on this message, in part because I felt a responsibility not to put something out that would be misleading or perhaps undermining the medical community in its work to protect our physical well-being. So I slept on it, and the next day I got that intuitive, yes, share this, share it, do it. You're sharing it in integrity, it's clean. So I posted it, and very quickly it started to circulate. I don't necessarily want to say it went viral, but you could say that. And before too long, maybe hundreds of thousands of people had come to my website, which is an experience I haven't had before. And I was invited to be on a radio program and talk about the gifts of the coronavirus and its message. So that was how John found me, because this viral blog post found him. And maybe that's an example, an illustration of how interconnected we are and how these times are showing us the way. And the virus is facilitating synaptic connections. It's those networks of cooperation which are forming organically and spontaneously. It's interesting to me that in India, there have been few cases relative to the population size and very few deaths. Now, part of that will be the challenge of reporting and doing enough testing, I realize. At the same time, the Prime Minister's response was to invite the entire nation to meditate together, and he offered mantras for healing and protection. And India is a place where the collective field of consciousness and energy supports the miraculous, supports the experience of realms of reality that we would say aren't ordinary in the West. And so there's a collective belief that mantras work, that meditation works, and they do. What we have in the West is a collective disbelief, and so we perhaps hinder our own abilities to heal and come into harmony and coherence with one another. And India is not perfect, of course, but in this way, it has retained something very, very special, very important, a medicine for humanity. And I'm not aware of any other country that has responded to the virus with meditation and verbal invocations of healing that are spiritual in nature. So we'll see in some months how it all turns out, but it does seem to work. And the science is starting to say quite a lot, for instance, that gratitude practices boost our immune system. And I wrote another article called Creating the Foundations of Health, which was a meditative inquiry into what are the causes of COVID, which is the kind of disease response to the presence of the virus. And of course, the presence of the virus is one of the factors, but intuitively I got it's a very small percentage, that there are other factors that are much more important. And the presence of fear, the presence of judgment, the presence of also air pollution and other forms of pollution, all of those make us susceptible. So in polluted cities, there is a greater incidence and a higher mortality. And that's one of the lessons that we're learning, is to clean up our act on every level, from physical pollution to the inner pollution of fear and the kind of name calling that we see in the political process in the United States. It's been interesting. I left India as soon as the government declared they were closing their borders and the World Health Organization had declared pandemic, and that was expected. So when that finally happened, government started to act quickly to close borders and institute quarantines. And so I had an intuitive knowing, now is time. I was actually on a Zoom call with people that Thursday morning. And something in me said, you might want to look at the headlines. So I went to the Times of India website, and sure enough, there was an awkwardly written headline that suggested, I had to work it out, that the border was about to close. So I went back to the Zoom call and said, my friends, sorry, first of all, for multitasking, but I got the message to look at the web for news. And well, it does seem the Mystic Express will be canceled because the Norwegian yoga students who were scheduled to arrive on the Sunday, a few days later, would not be able to enter the country. So then I bought a one-way, same-day ticket to Australia and stayed ahead of the quarantines, and it's all been very easy. I'm happy to report. The process was easy in part because I have a practice of listening for what's next, and actually calibrating the sense of aliveness and the sense of truth and different opportunities. So although I had that spontaneous intuitive nudge, check the web, and I followed that, when it came time to make the decision what to do, I created a list: stay in India, go to Ladakh, which would be beautiful. It might even be fun to be, quote, stuck in Ladakh for a month. But when I made the list, which included fly today to Australia, the list item that buzzed for me was leave now. You've done what you needed to do in India. You received the message from the coronavirus. In that field of energy and consciousness, it was possible to have a connection with this super intelligent being that we call Corona. So that's why I needed to go to India. I didn't know when I was back in the USA what would come of it, but I knew enough to say yes. And so following the path of yes has, for the last 10 years, served me very, very well. I'll give you a little bit of background, because this isn't all about the coronavirus, but it's certainly interesting given the times we live in, to start here. So I studied mathematics and physics in college. I was really drawn to explanations of reality that were precise, and rigorous. And I remember at one point in college saying, I don't know if these were the words, it was really close though, I abhor revealed truth. I wanted everything to be worked out and derived logically from high quality axioms and postulates. I figured out pretty quickly that you can't answer the most important questions that way, but there was a time when I was very hopeful that that linear logical thinking could take us to enlightenment. And certainly reason has a role. And perhaps it's no accident that the age of reason was also called the age of enlightenment, because relative to the prior dark ages, it was a kind of enlightenment. But we can go further than the left brain, it turns out. And so I had this training in math and physics. And after college, well, I discovered that math didn't have all the answers in college. And so after college, I didn't go to graduate school. Instead, I wandered into an internet company called Tripod in 1995 and learned how to write software. They asked me to program some things, and I ended up writing an application called, prosaically, the Homepage Builder, which allowed anyone in the world, anywhere, to create their own website for free. And this was 1995. It was Web 1.0. Everything was very basic, rudimentary, even crude by today's standards. But what I had written was good enough, and Tripod became a top 10 website pretty quickly. We had millions and millions of users all over the world. I think we had 35 million people who had created their own website. And in 1995, 6, 7, that was a big number. Big percentage of the online population. So that was interesting to me, that we have technology, internet technology, giving people a voice. So everyone now has at least the ability to share, to speak their mind, to speak their heart, and be received by others anywhere in the world. This was a kind of epiphany, kind of Satori moment. There's something to this internet thing. And subsequently, I co-founded or participated in a number of other internet companies. They weren't as successful. Beginner's luck, you could say, right time, right place. But they all taught me something about the power of online technology, and increasingly the power of consciousness technology. I came to understand that the internet was rewiring our brains and connecting our hearts. I talked about connecting the global heart. Finally, I had the courage to speak about it in those terms. And along the way, I was at a company that I didn't necessarily love as much. So part of the wandering about was finding what I loved and finding what I didn't love. I co-founded a company that was in the medical imaging space, and early on in telemedicine. And we set up one of the early teleradiology networks that allowed for doctors, radiologists in faraway places where it was daytime to read cases, MRI images, CT scans, and so on, for hospitals in rural USA where there wouldn't be an on-call doctor, and yet time was critically of the essence if there had been an accident or something. So this technology wasn't just giving people a voice, it was saving lives. And so at some point, I really got that that the world was changing profoundly and would never go back, thanks to the internet. And we're at another point now where the world is changing profoundly and will never go back. A recent poll in the United Kingdom asked the question, how many people would you like to go back to the way things were? And the result was 9% of respondents said they would like to go back to the way things were before the coronavirus pandemic, and 91% would not. So we're not going back. We're really in a beautiful new world, even though it's still being revealed to us. It's emerging, as John was saying. So at this company, though, the teleradiology medical imaging company, that I got was really important, but not really resonating my heart. I was in the office one weekend where we had a nice big whiteboard, and I was dreaming about physics. That was still something I liked to do. And I had an insight. into subatomic particles that I'm sure was correct. And it had to do with higher dimensional spaces. And you could have one particle, and if it's oriented in one way, it would look to us in 3 dimensions like a certain kind of quark. And if it was oriented in a different manner in that higher dimensional space, it would look to us like a different type of quark. And sounds simple enough to say, but something was right. It must have been right, because I had this energy in my spine that was so strong, and it shot up my spine, and then it went to the top of my head. And before I knew it, I was dancing around the room quite spontaneously, actually allowing the energy to move me. And I did that for at least an hour. And then I was also drawing equations on the whiteboard. I don't know that the equations were mathematically sound, but they were beautiful. And this was an experience that I had no name for, but subsequently, many years later, maybe 10 years later, I learned the word Kundalini. And I was like, oh yes, that must be what happened. So there was a Kundalini awakening. And I know for some people that can be disruptive. Fortunately, in my case, it wasn't. And I had no fear. It just felt great. This warm, glowing energy throughout my spine and whole being. I suppose I had experienced that a few times prior, but not with that kind of intensity. And I wasn't able previously to connect it with any particular thought. But this time, the correlation was unmistakable. There was something correct, and I had this physical response that I could not ever mistake as an accident. I'd never experienced anything like it. It was like being knocked upside the head to say, please pay attention. And fortunately, I did. Although it took me a few years, actually, to be honest. It took me a few years before I shared with people what had happened and what had continued to be the case afterwards, which is if I was engaging with something that had a rightness to it, if I was making a decision and considering this way or that way, I would feel in my body a kind of glowing energy in the spine, not a Kundalini activation, nothing so strong. And that wasn't necessary anymore because that energy had gotten my attention, and I was being mindful, paying attention to the body, and really starting to listen inwardly. Starting a long process. Process continues. And so a few years later, if that was 2002 when I had the Kundalini awakening, it was 2007 when I wrote a blog post called The Signal, where I came out of the closet and I said, there's this interesting thing that happens for me, and that tells me when I'm on the right path. And very soon after I wrote that blog post, it was just, yay long, not very big, maybe 3 paragraphs, I discovered a spiritual path at that time, A Course in Miracles, which I devoured. I read the big text twice in the first year and did the workbook for students, and was really devoted and discovered meditation in the process. And I'm forever grateful to the Course for what it offered me, which was an on-ramp and a foundation, practices of forgiveness, so many tools, so many powerful, memorable phrases that still come to me. And I have never looked back. I have stayed devoted to resonance, which is what I came to call this feeling, this felt sense of yes in the body. And the more that I've worked with it, the more that it has actually become subtler and subtler. So now it's rarely felt strongly, but I will have a kind of knowing, more of a claircognizance that whatever it is I'm looking at, for instance, flying to Australia nonstop, paying for a same-day ticket, paying kind of a lot of money for a same-day ticket was the right thing to do, and not questioning that, just trusting. Now, if I had the experience where the guidance was saying one thing and the left brain was saying something else, then I would take that as an indication that there's more to know. I have 2 ways of knowing that are not agreeing, so there must be more to the picture. It's like the people who are feeling the elephant and one person is touching the trunk, the blind people, because otherwise they would see the elephant in its entirety. And then one person is touching one of the legs and they have a totally different idea of the elephant. these ideas seem not to agree, but it's the same elephant. So that's how I look at the multiple ways of knowing. And when they agree, that tells me it's a great decision. When they don't, the process continues, and then we get to agreement. It's kind of an internal process of settling where I ask for guidance in as many ways as possible, including people in the world might say something at just the right time, or there might be a synchronicity, and all of these forms of confirmation add up to say, this is the way to go. So I discovered guidance by degrees starting in 2002, accelerating in 2007. By 2010, I had really established a practice of always asking, not always being clear, but always asking. I might ask a question that wasn't the best question, but at least I was asking. So I was in a conversational relationship with life. And I would offer that we can all be, and we all are actually, in a conversational relationship with life. And at any moment, we can be more explicit in that relationship and ask for guidance. And we're all wired uniquely. Every person is this miraculous manifestation of so many ingredients composed in a way that could never be reproduced. A masterpiece, art, in the highest light. So I want to celebrate, in this moment, I want to celebrate each of you for being you and for being perfect. Nako was saying in the song, we were born perfect. And we remain perfect, even with our foibles. Like the foibles are perfect. Everything about us is perfect. Our gifts are not gifts. For instance, I wasn't sufficiently gifted in mathematics in this lifetime to go further. I could have gone to graduate school, but to win a Fields Prize, for instance, a Fields Medal, which is the top. I mean, like there are people for whom that is clearly their path, that is their dharma. And I would say it's even a spiritual path, but it wasn't mine. And it took a little while to reconcile with the fact that, oh, okay, well, I haven't been given that level of mathematical aptitude. And the not receiving that was actually a gift, because if I'd been so focused in that domain, I would have stayed with the linear, rational approach to asking the big questions, and I would have received limited answers. But I had just enough aptitude there and systematic thinking to do something unique that had never been done before, to my knowledge. And that involved bringing the felt sense of resonance and the intuitive signaling together with the analysis. So I mentioned before that I made a list when it was time to leave India. And that was a simple list. The options seemed pretty clear to me at the time. Stay in India, leave. If I leave, do I go back to the US? That was a big no. I could feel, don't go to the US for some reason. It's not going to be a good place to be for the pandemic. Go to Australia. Turns out Australia has been very minimally impacted by the virus. And I know that all of you or most of you are in the USA right now, and so I feel for you. I am American. I know an awful lot of people. I've had many clients in New York City, and I've heard some stories. So I just need to pause and, again, appreciate that these times are momentous and challenging. And I'm grateful that I was able to get the signal, and I had the flexibility to go anywhere in that moment. So the list that I made, it wasn't just a list of a few things, it was a resonance map. And a resonance map is a list with a value. And so one of the things that I will do with this felt sense of resonance, or this knowing, this claircognizance I mentioned, is put a number to each item. And it started off with a 0 to 10 scale. And so I would ask, this was going back a few years. I was starting to spend time in Seattle, and I had many opportunities to join nonprofit boards or work with this group or that group, and too many actually to make sense of. So I knew the only way I could discern what to say yes to would be a more right brain process. And so I would intuitively get values for all those opportunities. And I did this coming back to India. I did this for the big question a couple months ago. And so let's say I would get a 9 for one item and a 3 for another item. It's pretty clear the 9 wins. Now, I've done this so much that the scale has evolved. I'm actually not using those kinds of numbers. I'm working with different types of infinity. But the point remains that I'm working with lists and I'm quantifying the resonance of the different items, and then I'm putting the top items at the top and following that. That's my rigorous practice, to follow what resonates. And I see, okay, the time, very good. So resonance mapping was born. I could say an awful lot more about what it is. It's not just a tool for decision making. What I discovered was that if I said yes to the most resonant items, and actually did that and had the discipline to follow through, and of course along the way confirm that it was the right thing through synchronicities and having it make sense to the left brain, I discovered life worked better. I experienced love much more fully and directly. And indeed, that's the number one gift of resonance mapping. It enables one to come to love. What is the resonance actually? It's not only, hey, do this thing because you'll like the result. Well, you'll like the result because this thing is more directly connected with love, is an expression of love, more fully, more obviously. And so resonance mapping has helped me to come home to love. And it's been, from what I can tell, a direct path of liberation. So when I work with people and we make a resonance map for them, the things, the items, the opportunities that resonate the most are those that lead most directly to homecoming, to realizing who and what we truly are, deep, deep, deep down in our roots, and then in our expression as human beings. So that's the second gift of resonance mapping, is liberation and homecoming, which I'd love to say more about in a few minutes. And then resonance mapping also tells us where to focus. And that is the third gift. So I realized that this approach of synthesizing analysis and quantifying the opportunities with the intuitive ways of accessing guidance was a new way in which humans can be in the world. So the split between people who are analytical and people who are intuitive and artistic, it doesn't need to be the case. It's a false dichotomy. We can bring our left and right brains together into a whole brain and experience life in a beautiful, flowing way, which I feel is the future of humanity. So when we talk about the new humanity that's emerging after it's already emerging, but is going to be more expressed after the pandemic, it's a humanity that's integrated, where we have shifted significantly from making decisions using our intellects to making decisions guided by intuition. Jonas Salk, who created the polio vaccine, he said, intuition tells the thinking mind where to look. So we're learning to use our intuitions, and then the machinery of our logical thinking will support the direction that is discerned by our intuition. And what I've found in this practice is at least 80%, maybe 95% of my energy is no longer going to what is off topic, but I'm able to focus like a laser on what it is that I am to be doing. And the result is a lot of productivity, a whole lot of joy, a worldwide web of relationships with amazing people like you, and real fulfillment, actually, on multiple levels, all levels, ultimately. So there is a homecoming, and it's still happening. My invitation would be that we all find our way to experience guidance, because we all have it. We all have this capacity to be nudged by the universe. Some of us will hear, some of us will see clairvoyantly, some of us will feel in our bodies. Like my initial experience was maybe more of a clairsentience, a kind of feeling and physical embodiment also of this resonance. But whatever the ways are for you, some people work with pendulums, some people feel, for instance, that their heart is rising in their chest. That would be a yes. There is no limit. Another woman, a person I know, feels tingling in her arms and the hairs stand up. That's one of her yeses. So find the way that you are connected to the inspiration, the breath, the divine breath that's flowing through creation. And listen, practice listening, and then align your life with the still small voice in whatever form it takes for you. So there are some learnings that I would like to share. I mentioned the shift from intellect to intuition. That's a biggie. I'm noticing that people who have mastered left brain analysis are struggling a bit more in the world right now. The world is making less sense. People who are used to strategizing, businesses that are used to creating strategies and going for it. You know, whatever that strategy is, come hell or high water, pardon the expression, that's what we're going to do. Well, life doesn't quite work that way, especially now. Life is much more fluid and flowing and complex, and whatever compass heading we might have, it would serve us well to be very flexible and relax the attachment to outcome and allow ourselves to be guided by life, because we might think we're going here, but actually by starting in that direction, we then follow the river which leads in another direction to something that is actually much better, much more joyful than what we would have been aiming for. I guess an example would help. So let's suppose that I stayed with the path of studying math and physics, which I thought was my path for life, my first year or two of college. Perhaps I could have been successful as a professor, but I'm sure I would not have had the joy that I'm experiencing now. It's not a controlled experiment. I didn't do that, but I can definitely tune into what life is like. And I know college professors. So I know enough to say, actually, wow, I couldn't have planned to be here talking about resonance and homecoming, but I wouldn't ever want to be anywhere else. So some more learnings. Recently, in particular, people have come to me saying, I feel blocked. And when I scan, I'll say clairvoyantly, when I scan their system and I look for the block, I can't find it. That's interesting, because a year ago I would have said, oh yeah, blocks. You know, we kind of take for granted there are blocks. And I know there's truth in that, so I'm not wanting to disagree with huge chunks of spiritual tradition. But what I'm seeing now, and I think this is new, is that actually we're not blocked. We're not being held back because something is out of alignment. Actually, we're so in alignment that life is simply sequencing us. So where we feel blocked, it's something that isn't ready yet. And it's kind of like an embryo, in the sense that an embryo needs to unfold and grow and awaken in a very specific sequence. Otherwise, you don't have a baby. You don't have a healthy human form. So we are like a big embryo, the new humanity that must emerge a little bit here, a little bit there. And if we're feeling resistance, we can ask, well, is this mine to do? B, is now the time? Because it might not be. So I'm seeing that literally there are no obstacles. So this is something you can try out in your life, where you feel there's an obstacle. See if you can reframe it, re-understand it as simply a question of sequencing and timing. Oh, don't do that now, do something else, and see whether that something else will come to you. Another key learning from the last month, I would say, so this is all very recent, that life is in charge. And maybe that won't surprise you, but life has always been in charge. Nature bats last. I don't know if you've heard that expression. Humans can do lots of polluting, but nature bats last. Eventually, it'll be something like the coronavirus that stops us in our tracks. So nature always has the final say, which is true of life. And what I'm seeing with people I know is that life is starting to live through them consciously. People are surrendering the sense of the small self more and more and more, and relaxing into the flow of life. Resonance will help with that, and allowing their vessel to be filled with spirit, and allowing their small self to become one with the big self, with spirit itself, which means we don't lose ourselves, we gain the totality. So life is in charge, and we can listen, notice, and align ourselves with how life is moving in our lives. I use resonance mapping. You might use a pendulum. You might have another way. When we align ourselves with life, it's a little bit like a magnetic field. You could have thousands and thousands of little iron filings, and they start off all randomized. pointing in different directions, but you bring the magnet, and now the iron filings align themselves with one another. And that's similar to the harmonious civilization that is coming and will come so much faster than we believe is possible, because the magnet, which is consciousness, has been added. And initially there's a big readjustment period. So I was getting that the last 40 years, 1979 to 2019, is a socioeconomic paradigm, and it's ending. And as of the end of March, we were 11% on a new path. As of the end of April, 96%. But my scale, as I mentioned before, goes beyond numbers, so definitely goes beyond 100%. By the end of May, we'll be at 1 trillion%. So May is a big acceleration into the new pattern. June, these values go infinite. By the beginning of July, the value that I use for resonance anyway, and I use for this particular inquiry, goes all the way. So June, July is really the tipping point into the new pattern. And so we're going to experience changes, even in our physical bodies, and changes at every level of our reality. And after July, we'll be in the new pattern. I have a strong knowing that in the USA, by November, December, we'll be seeing the beautiful new beginnings, the green shoots, the promising new solutions at a local level, especially. And finally, in terms of the learnings from the last month or two, from pandemic times, whatever, and I'm seeing this, whatever we have most deeply been desiring in our hearts, which is in alignment with life, that is what is manifesting. So whatever you've been deeply longing for at a soul level is actually what's happening now. It's being delivered. It's being delivered probably through some kind of process. So many of us have been asking for global transformation. Please let us have a society that actually feeds people and keeps people healthy and is equitable and doesn't exclude, but includes everyone and nature, so we can live in harmony, not just as brothers and sisters and others, but as the entirety of a living web on planet Earth. And that is what's happening. And in our own personal lives, whatever we've been asking for is what's happening. So we need to give it a little time. And if we let go of the fear, especially, that opens up a space for the manifestation. Now, another thing I want to say about that, I have been so painfully aware of the political situation in the United States, the polarization especially. And I'm not picking sides here. I'm noticing the polarization itself. And what I saw is the benefit of the polarization is that when half the population runs one way and half the population runs the other way, that creates a kind of opening in the field for something really, really big to arise from the ground of being. And so in the United States, the conditions, even though they are chaotic and confused and sometimes very unpleasant, are actually ideal for something, for this great creativity to manifest a new organizing principle for society. So the USA will be one of the first places where the beautiful new beginnings are visible to the eye. So we're approaching time, and I want to say that these beautiful new beginnings are kind of homecoming. A homecoming socially, a homecoming spiritually, because it will work socially, it will work at the level of society, because more and more people are discovering the spiritual roots and able to live from the roots, to live deeply connected with life and with nature and one another. And I know from personal experience that a way to deepen very, very quickly is to find our connection to source, our connection to universal intelligence, creator, God. Use the words that work for you and work with it. In my case, I'm a scientist, so I work with it very systematically. I'm also capable of being extremely laser focused, and that has served me well, because sometimes you have to have a laser in order to kind of punch through the steel walls of the old way of doing things. But once that has happened, we don't all need to be the same way. So I'm here to invite each and every one of us into personal, direct relationship with inspiration, and to live from that place and to experience ourselves actually as the source of the inspiration, which is wild, but in non-duality, we expand and open and dissolve into the realization that, whoa, we're not only the receiver, we're not only the vessel, but we're also the source. That's pretty wild. And eventually we'll understand how it works, but we don't need to understand how it works now. Just that it works, that this relationship with our origin was never severed and never could be, because we are that. And I would like to conclude by sharing a link for you to look at a little later to something that I'm writing now, which is, here it comes, a cosmology of homecoming. So on my previous trip to Australia, I asked 2 questions. When you ask a good question, the answer usually comes pretty quickly and powerfully. So the first question was basically, why aren't there lots more awakened people on the planet? And I received the answer that, well, there are many wonderful, amazing spiritual paths, and they're all perfect. And there are some paths that are still emerging, which will take people to the finish line. And that finish line is of homecoming, really, spiritual self-realization. And we're all going to get there. That's the incredible beauty and fairness of the spiritual process, which is we will all realize. And with this, I also received a cosmology, and there's a beautiful image, like a flower, of different realms of being, realms of awareness and realization of the presence of love. And that's what you'll find via the link that I just shared to the cosmology of homecoming. It's a work in progress, it's a living document, but it's already a transmission of essentially everything I've learned so far in one way or another. So I invite you to check out my website at jeffvanderclute.com. And if you see something that can be improved, which is definitely the case, to let me know. And to bask in what I hope you'll find to be a field of love and welcoming and invitation into your true self, and an invitation for all of our true selves to come together and live into the inevitability of the new humanity. Because I see we will never go back to unawareness. We are becoming more aware, and we wouldn't choose to go back. So let's keep leaning in, following guidance, loving one another, coming together on Zoom, tech challenges notwithstanding, practicing together, and celebrating these times. So again, I want to thank you all. I want to celebrate our time today. And if there are any questions, of course, I'd love to hear those. And again, a lot of love and namaste to you. First of all, I really am greatly appreciative of the millions of people who are looking for the truth behind what's going on. And there are multiple layers, and some of them are quite hidden, and some of them are quite unpleasant. I know that love prevails. I know that where we end up is beautiful. Like, I've actually seen visions of 2117 and the 2200s, and we're going to like it. And some of us might actually be there because longevity is going to be possible, notwithstanding 5G, but it'll be possible because of the realization that's happening. And part of the realization process is recognizing what we do not like, what does not serve life. And I see that even the fear, even the anger, and we might call those negative, and we don't necessarily want to linger there forever, but I see them as fuel. So the anger people have is actually fueling change. It's one form of fuel for change. And I find myself not wanting to short circuit anybody's process. If somebody is called to research the implications to our health of 5G or vaccines, and I have a friend who is very, shall we say, senior in the anti-vaccine movement. And so I've learned a lot from her, and I get it. I mean, for one, mercury in your body makes no sense whatsoever. So there's a lot that needs to change. And it might be that because these forces are entrenched, and I don't know if they're intentionally evil, I suspect not. I suspect most people are, and I get that most people are really doing what they think is right. They think they know what's right for other people, and that's where it gets to be unjust, because they're imposing their very limited worldview on others. So there needs to be some kind of pushback. It's part of the physics of consciousness. So Zach, I am grateful that you are reading and learning, and it seems to me that you have an ideal opportunity to bring the anxiety and the anger together with love, like to actually, like I was talking before about the benefit of polarization, creating this opening for new possibilities. I see in your case, and the case of so many people, the opportunity to bring the difficult stuff right next to love, which then alchemizes and transmutes. And I have a knowing that when you do it for yourself, you're doing it for everybody else, that it greatly influences the collective pattern of consciousness. And other people will start to have ideas pop into mind. And because of the work that you did, you might not ever have to broadcast what you're doing. And millions of other people are in their own process, in their own version of this. I'm in my own version of this. I'm staying with friends who are deeply interested, shall we say, in the conspiracy theories. And there will be some truth in everything. So my question is, let's find the truth. What is the truth in it? And let's bring that to light. Let's bring that to love. Let's do it in our own hearts. And this too shall pass. Maybe for now there are some rabbit holes, but I know in a few months you'll be on the other side of it. We'll be in the new pattern at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Be well.
You too. Thank you so much.